It really doesn't make any difference why you get married. It's what you do after the wedding.
Right.
I mean, we do have to face the fact that for most of the planet, most of the year, down through the ages, marriages were arranged and worked out very well, because people realized that once you were married, often the people you never met before the wedding day, that you had to construct something. It wasn't going to happen just because you had these warm feelings inside. I think Tevier does it well in Fiddler on the Roof, where he turns to his wife and says, "Do you love me?" And she begins to talk about all the things she did for him. I cooked for you, I mended your clothes, I did this, I did that. If that's not love, what is? And then you see that something was created between these two people over the years, and that becomes crucial. I would think that you'd be crazy if you married somebody who wasn't on the same spiritual wavelength that you were on. And that is more than just theological. I would like to know I'll tell you where I see the real divisions occurring in Christendom. It's between the mystical and the non-mystical. Does one have some kind of mystical experience with God? And do you feel a certain kinship with somebody who has that? For most people, Christianity is a theology and a moral code. And if you agree with the theology and the moral code, that's what's important. And if that's what's important to you, marry somebody like that. But don't marry somebody who's a mystic if you're just
Right.
in terms of theology.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is I have a great respect for Pentecostalism right now, because it's very mystical. And the Pentecostals are really a break-off of the Methodist. For John Wesley was a mystic. And if he put this set of books together for Methodist preachers, in England he had these young men going out all over to preach, and they weren't theologically trained. So he created what he called the Christian Library. And at one point, just out of sheer interest, because I was into the sociology of religion, what was in the library? I find Calvinism in it, Lutheranism, Zwingli, none of the reformers. They're all these Catholic mystics. They were reading St. Francis, they were reading St. John of the Cross, they were reading, and they were very much into Anglican mysticism. And that's what Wesley wanted. And in the end, that's what he got in that great, what we call the Aldersgate experience. Here he was, he went through theological school at Oxford, comes over to America as a missionary, goes back to England, battered, beaten, emotionally drained, and he wanders into a prayer meeting with about 30 people, a little building on Aldersgate Street, and he has what the Methodists call the Great Aldersgate Experience. And that's why every fifth Methodist church is called Aldersgate Methodist Church, and he's sitting there in this prayer meeting, and then as they're reading through the first chapter of Romans, he writes, "And suddenly," here's the mystical experience, "and suddenly my heart was strangely warmed." And I knew, that word, I knew, because up until then he just believed, but I knew. And the whole Wesleyan movement began of this spiritual thing. Spin-offs of the Methodist movement of the Nazarenes, because Wesley believed that sinless perfection was something that could be achieved in this lifetime, although he himself would never say, "I have achieved it." But he said there's no reason why you cannot become spiritually perfect. And the Nazarenes have made that their mantra. The spiritual perfection is a possibility. And then the Pentecostals are a spin-off of that. So that the first Pentecostal meetings on Azusa Street out on the West Coast were held in an old beat-up Methodist church that was just about closed. Once again, it's very experiential. And that experiential dimension is crucial. So if you're a mystic, you better marry a mystic. My wife and I didn't get along very well religiously. Other ways, we had fun together, we, you know, got along all right, but spiritually we were never on the same wavelength. This concept of having Christ invade you, having the Holy Spirit in you, feeling Christ's presence controlling you from within, that was foreign to her. And then she was great at living out the teachings of Jesus, caring for the orphan, the widow, and all of that. So she always had a string of elderly women that she went and visited. And one of them was named Mrs. Root. And Helen Root was a tough old lady. I mean, she sold truck parts to truck drivers on the road. I mean, not what you would envision a woman 60 years ago doing. And she talked rough and tough and had a way of it. There was an edge to her voice. And so what happened is that she fell and broke her hip. And she was dying. Elderly people, when they break a hip, usually pneumonia sets in and pneumonia kills them. And she knew she was dying. My wife's visiting them, and she said, you know, I've always believed in Jesus, but I've never really experienced Jesus. Assuming that my wife was on the same wave as I was, can you tell me how to have this experience? My wife knew enough to be able to pull all the stuff out of the bag and lay it on her. And she said, now let me take your hand and pray this prayer that the Spirit of God will invade you and you will feel His presence in your life. And she said, and as I'm praying for Helen Rue, I felt this invasion of the Spirit. And I came out of that hotel room a completely different person. Was she a Christian before? Of course she was. Did she have any kind of a mystical experience prior to Helen Rue? Answer is no. Now, that's part of it. Okay, let's get back to the reality of Marx. I mentioned that whoever controls the means of production ultimately ends up controlling the entire system. When Lenin took over in Russia, and when Mao took over in China, what they did was, with political power, with machine guns, they took over the means of production. The government now owned all the steel mills. The government now owned all the farms. The government, it was collective ownership of everything. There had been a vast modification since then. For instance, they find that they produce more food per acre if the farmers personally own the land than if it's cooperatively owned by the government. But the government owned everything. And they imposed change from the top down. They control the means of production. More and more, China is moving to a kind of a mixed economy in which they allow certain companies like General Motors to come in and establish private enterprise. And one of the funnier stories that I got from a Chinese guy I met in Washington was, he said Walmart opened up a Walmart in downtown Beijing, and everybody went rushing there for the first week because they thought, oh, an American store, we're going to buy stuff that Americans buy. And they went there, and everything that it was for sale was made in China. You know, this was not what they had bargained for. Okay, so let's take the United States as a case study. I said 30 years ago, the economic system did not control the political system. Case in point. In 1976, at the tail end of the Vietnam War, I ran for Congress from the 5th District, which included this area and Chester County. Very, very wealthy, very, very Republican district. It was registered 18% Democrat, and I was running as a Democrat. We ran an incredibly effective campaign, just using volunteers because we had no money. We ended up spending $18,000 on the campaign, running against an incumbent. Now the party would not even consider you as a candidate unless you're willing to spend $2 million on the campaign. Because you've got to buy television ads, et cetera, and all of this. The thing is, we didn't have all of that. We were running with a bunch of countercultural people from universities in the greater Philadelphia area and doing door-to-door campaigning and all of that kind of stuff. $18,000 compared to $2 million. Now my opponent, I thought he'd spent an exorbitant amount of money. I spent $250,000, $250,000. I thought that was exorbitant. I went after him as, where are you getting your money? Because you know whoever pays the fiddler can call the tune. When you realize that a candidate for the presidency now has to spend billions of dollars, and those monies come from special interest groups, and he can't win without them. As a matter of fact, when you go to newspapers, as campaigns begin to develop, they won't deal with issues anymore. You know what they report? How much money the Republicans have raised. Check this out. How much money has the Democrats raised? How much money has this candidate raised? How much has his opponent raised? The implication is what? Whoever raises the most money wins the campaign, you see. Now, in 1970s, it was the tail end of the radical SDS movement, Students for a Democratic Society. You don't even remember this. These were communist movements on university campuses. And they were all working my campaign because they were opposed to the war. So the campaign brought together fundamentalists and communists. It was a great combination. And they learned from each other a great deal. But they would do things that were so clever, you had to stand back and admire them. I remember one night driving home from Souderton, Pennsylvania. You wouldn't know where that is. I listened to the radio in the middle of the campaign, and they said, the Campolo for Congress rally that was scheduled for Lansdale this evening has been called off because of the threat of the hurricane. Well, there was a threat of a hurricane. It wasn't a very great threat, but there was going to be huge amounts of rain. And they called it, and I said, a rally in Lansdale? There's nothing on my calendar. Oh, there's no rally. Well, you just called it off. Oh, yes. And we called every radio station in the area. And at least 10 times a day they were saying, the Campolo for Congress rally has been canceled tonight. The Campolo for Congress rally was canceled tonight. Said 15 stations, 10 times a day. That's 150 hits for Campolo for Congress on the radio. We can't buy that kind of time. So, you know, we had all of this clever manipulation of the media that, you know, honest people do not usually employ. It was incredible. They did all kinds of strange and wonderful things. But we ended up with 43% of the vote. And we were closing in so quickly. We'd gone from 18% to 43% in 2.5 months. And the experts were saying if this campaign goes on another 2 weeks, there's a good chance you'll win the whole thing. And as we're closing in, something incredible happened. I began getting calls from all these special interest groups. U.S. Steel, which had a big mill up in Pottstown. The auto workers in Allentown had a factory that produced trucks, and Mack trucks were produced up there. That the labor unions and the corporations were beginning to call me. And of course, in those days, you could get a list of who was contributing to your opponent. And the people who had already given money to my opponent were calling me and saying, we want to finance your campaign. I said, but you're already financing my opponent. And of course, they kind of heeded, well, but you could see what they were doing. They were hedging their bets. There's an outside chance this guy might win. And we better buy him as well as buying his opponent. When you've got this situation where campaigns are up for sale, then those who control the means of production, the big corporation, the automobile company, the medical profession, these people are buying candidates, and you can't dress it up any other way. You can't dress it up any other way. And so the economic system now controls the political system, which is just the opposite of what Marx did in Russia, where the political system took control of the economic system. Do you see the difference between the two? Now, coupled with this, is natural resources. Let me just put it to you briefly. That weapons of mass destruction, they didn't exist. But we did know that Korea had weapons of mass destruction and was threatening to use them. Why didn't we invade North Korea? Well, let me tell you why. There's no oil in North Korea. And if mushrooms instead of oil had been the major export of Iraq, I doubt if we would have invaded. Let's face it for what it is. One of the things I liked about Rush Limbaugh is he said, that's right, we're invading Iraq to get their oil. Why should we let those stupid people have that natural resource? It belongs to the advanced nations like America. You know, I mean, he understood what the name of the game was. I don't like Rush Limbaugh, but he understood what it was about. So you've got to understand, natural resources, do you have them? If you have them, I don't care. If you don't have access to natural resources, your whole system will close down. If we lose the supply of oil that keeps the machinery, the means of production moving, the system will close down. There'll be massive unemployment. Family life will disintegrate. The major cause of divorce is not adultery. Check it out. The major cause of divorce is conflict over economic issues. Husband and wife fight over money and they end up divorcing. Over money. 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 Gosh. No wonder in Cabaret the lead song was, money makes the world go around, makes the world go round, makes the world go round. That becomes that particular view. Yes?
As far as natural resources, another example would be Rwanda. From studying there and learning about the genocide, a big, huge reason people, or the West didn't get involved is because they had nothing to offer them.
Yeah, well, what do we care whether those people kill each other? You know, the minute the resources that are keeping our economy going are in question, we're ready to invade. I mean, it's a very scary thing. That's a strong statement, and it's an overstatement, and it's an exaggeration. But there's sufficient truth in that. So you were there to watch all that happen. Horrible thing.
Yeah, I didn't watch it happen. I was in Rwanda with GoEd, which is also part of this.
Bill Clinton, who's in Rwanda at least twice a year now, said the streets are clean, the government's working with optimum efficiency, there's very, very little corruption, if there's any at all. He couldn't find any. And he said, things are going great. That's what he said. The streets are clean. The public institutions are functioning. And I said, how do you explain that? He said, well, so many men died that women are controlling everything. And he's absolutely right. That most of the ministries in the government are now run by women. And it has a, I mean, I don't know what that says about men versus women, but when women took over control, things are moving ahead pretty well. Well, enough of that. Let's go on to population. You know, if you have too few people, you can't keep the economy going. What we don't realize, for instance, is this massive immigration from south of the border. You're saying, I don't know whether we can afford them. I don't know whether we can survive if they don't come. Because Americans aren't producing enough children, and the result is, who's going to buy what we produce? If you don't have people buying, and if you get fewer and fewer buyers, the economy will come to a standstill. Agreed? So you need an expanded population just to consume what an efficient system can produce. I could go on, but you've got the plot. Enough about Marx. Every social institution is basically controlled by what happens in the infrastructure. What happens to the church, what happens to education. Think of how our education system has changed. More and more, we want every kid coming out of school. We don't care whether he knows Shakespeare, whether he knows history, whether he has any concept of the philosophical ideas that have molded Western society. We want to know whether he's able to work a computer. We want to know whether he has the skills. I mean, you hear these people. Does he have the skills that the modern economy requires? I mean, do I sound like Obama? We need to raise up a generation that has the skills that our modern economy requires. We're not interested in thinkers. We're not interested in humanistic values. We don't care whether they know anything about art. We don't care whether they know anything about music. We don't care whether we know anything about any of these things. What we care about is, do they have the technological skills? Namely, do they have the instruments for the means of production that exist within the society? the whole educational system. And so Bloom writes his book against higher education. Higher education is a joke right now. I hate to break it to you people, since you're spending so much to get higher education, but it's a joke. The reality is this is not a university, this is not a college, this is a technical school. This is a place where you learn how to do things. If somebody says, I'm majoring in English, the first question you ask is what? What are you going to do with that? That would have never been asked when I was coming through school. A guy says, I'm majoring in art appreciation. The mother rolls his eyes and says, are you taking an accounting course? You know, at least you'll have something when you come out of school. I mean, the idea is we're trying to raise up a generation of people that are functionally fit for a technological society. Are we training up people who will fit into this system? You see. So very little is taught in the sense of values, sense of morals, in the sense of religion. These things are off the curriculum. What is high on the curriculum right now is, do you have the technical skills that will fit into the demands of a highly technological society? Let's move on. Let's move on to Max Weber. I like Weber, and if you ask me what I really am, I'm a Weberian. I think that Marx does a brilliant job of analyzing why society is the way it is. I don't think he has an answer of how to change it. His only way of changing it is by revolution. And here there are certain other sociologists that have a great deal to contribute. Two that I like. One is named Pareto. He's an Italian, P-A-R-E-T-O. Not much is said about Pareto. Very good sociologist. George Sorel, S-O-R-E-L, another very famous sociologist in Germany, not here in the United States. Brilliant guys. And these particular people said, in reaction to Marx, said, okay, you stage your revolution. So what do you have? You cannot have a revolution and create democracy. Let me repeat that. Sorel said you cannot have a revolution and through a revolution create a democracy. You say, well, it worked here in the United States. We had a revolution and we created a democracy out of it. No, we didn't. We didn't answer the obvious question. What happened to all the loyalists? Those that were loyal to the British Crown. What happened to them when the revolution was over? Did we all shake hands and say, let bygones be bygones? Certainly not. They fled to Canada. That was the War of 1812 was all about. It was the guys who had their rear ends beaten by the Yankee forces, having their chance to come back and beat us up again. If you go up to Halifax, who was from Halifax? Yeah, I mean, Benedict Arnold was a hero in Halifax. A guy who was a spy for the Royal Crown. And in Halifax, that whole city was built around the fact that they were waiting for the invasion to come up from the United States. You go up on that hill right in the center of town, and the battlements are built there, ready for the American invasion. They were sure that we were going to come up and take the land away from them. They saw America as the enemy. These were the refugees from the American Revolution. They came up there, they fled the States because they had lost the war. When you lose, you get out of town as quickly as possible. You become refugees. And so, in fact, a significant proportion of Canadian citizens in the 1700s were refugees from the United States and the American Revolution. You see, it's easy to understand. You're going to have a totalitarian government regardless of which side wins. Why? Because those who lose simply go into hiding and wait for the chance to take power again. It'll always happen. So if the Loyalists had won, people like Thomas Jefferson, they wouldn't have disappeared. They would have gone underground and would have been milling around trying to put together a group of people who would be counter-revolutionaries, who would take the government away from the Loyalists. If the Loyalists had won, that's what would have happened. They won, and the people who were Loyalists fed, we either have to get out of the country or we have to become subversives within the country. In short, the losers are always treated as dangerous people who have to be kept in line. And that necessitates some form of dictatorial control. So when there's a revolution, there will always be a dictatorship. It might be a benevolent dictatorship. The United States had a fairly benevolent dictatorship. fairly benevolent. But the truth is, to the winners, there is oppression. To the losers, they're the oppressed. At the end of the Civil War, what happened? The South was terribly oppressed. Terribly oppressed. You know the whole era immediately following the Civil War. I mean, the Southern whites had no rights at all. I mean, it was horrible. And so what happened was, there was a counter-revolution, wasn't there? And all of a sudden the whites rose up and they took power away from the blacks, who had become congressmen, senators, people in the House of Representatives. They controlled almost every state government in the South. They rose up, they took over, and they put the blacks down again. Dictatorial rule results from revolution. There's got to be a better way. Here's Weber. Weber says there are 4 factors influencing social change. In this respect, he had it all over Marx. He doesn't so much describe society as he tells you how to change it. Here are the things that are necessary to facilitate a societal change on the macro level. First, you need a charismatic personality. A charismatic personality. You say, like who? I'll give you a charismatic personality. Adolf Hitler. He wasn't a good man. Was he charismatic? Please understand the miracle that he performed. He took over Germany after World War II, which was beaten down to nothing. Agreed? They were disillusioned, there was depression, economic disaster, and he takes this country and over a period of 6 years makes it into a military powerhouse, creates total employment for the German people, the economy's moving ahead, it's become one of the most, if not the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. Now stop to think about that. I mean, I think it was evil that Nazism was the worst evil that could have befallen Germany. But having said that, just look at it from a sociological point of view. Think of a leader that can take a country that's bombed and defeated and discouraged and demoralized and raise it up and get them to believe that they no longer see themselves as a beaten down people. They actually end up believing that what? They're a superior race. That they are in fact the fulfillment of Nietzsche's Zarathustra. They are the Ubermensch, the Superman. They are the superior race. And they are going to, in fact, feel that they have a perfect right to bring Polish people into submission because they're an inferior race, and we need inferior races to do the dirty work of the superior races. And you've got the Jews, we want to get rid of them. They're a fungus on the system. And so you get this racial ideology. But think of the total sociological effect of taking a people who feel like they're nothing and getting them to believe they're the best people on the planet, getting their economy into high gear, rebuilding everything in the blink of an eye. We didn't even know what was happening. It happened so fast. A charismatic personality. A charismatic personality can be evil. A charismatic personality can be good. But a charismatic personality, in fact, performs a miracle. In fact, the miracles of Hitler are amazing for historians to face up to. Alsace-Lorraine. The word was Germany wanted that land back because it had once been part of Prussia. Want that land back. So what happens? Hitler sends his army into Alsace-Lorraine. They are given the instruction that they are never to fire their guns. They just march into Alsace-Lorraine. Guess what? Alsace-Lorraine says, we belong to Hitler. Amazing. Even more amazing is Czechoslovakia. You know, we always say, poor Czechoslovakia, poor Czechoslovakia. May I tell you this, that the Czech army was larger and better equipped than the German army, had more tanks, had more men under arms than the German army. He took over without firing a shot. Incredible. Stop to think about this. I mean, he took over countries without firing a shot. Bulgaria takes over. Not a shot is fired. I mean, if you were German during the 1930s, you had to be standing back, drooling under the side. We don't believe it. We're conquering Europe. It wasn't until the tail end that he began to bomb. In the early stages, it was just, I'll march in, I'll take over, and countries just capitulated. I mean, that great scene where he annexes Austria. He just annexes. He goes into another country and says, guess what? You are no longer Austria. You now belong to the Socialist Republic of Germany. And what happens? When he drives into town, the people of Austria line the streets and cheer him like mad. There's this picture that I always remember from World War II of a woman holding up her hands, Heil Hitler, crying, and you're saying, oh, so that's what it's about. This poor woman is forced to say Heil Hitler. She's an Austrian German who's thrilled with Hitler coming into town. And her tears are tears of joy. It was great propaganda material. It just wasn't true. I mean, it's a charismatic personality. Charismatic personality, says Weber, tends to seem to have tapped in to supernatural powers. And there was a spirituality to the Nazi movement. The very sign of the swastika was reaching back in time. Incidentally, the one person who tapped into the mystic past of the German people, the one who tapped into the mystic past of the German people, was Friedrich Wagner, the musician, the Wagnerian operas. And so, in fact, Hitler every year would go down to that place in Bavaria where the big opera house was created for Wagner's operas. To this day, it's illegal to perform a Wagnerian opera in Israel because they saw Wagner creating the myths of the past. In simple language, it's a great story, the Wagnerian, the Ring Opera. It's just an incredible story. In it, there's this gold in the bottom of the Rhine, and whoever gets that gold and bends it into a ring will have the power of the gods, and the gods will die. And so you got this one guy who goes in and takes the gold and forms it into a ring. And the gods begin to die. And one of the great themes in Wagnerian opera is the twilight of the gods. As they begin to die, their time is over. And now the power that belongs to the gods now belongs to this guy. The Savior comes. His name is Siegfried. And he comes, and he's going to take the gold ring away. This is an oversimplified version of an opera that goes on for a week. You know, you got to go and stay down there in that town where the opera house is that was built by Wagner. Got to be there for the whole week to get the whole opera. You can't get it. But Siegfried goes down and he rescues us. He gets the gold, returns it to the bottom of the Rhine, and of course in the process he is cursed and dies. But in Christianity, God dies to save humanity. In Wagner's opera, a human being dies in order to save the gods. Do you begin to see why Nietzsche would see Wagner as his hero? Because he wanted to turn Christianity on its heels. And it's a very, very fascinating thing. But the charismatic personality, there have been many charismatic personalities down through history. Joan of Arc was a charismatic personality. The great songs of the French movement, Sons of Toil and Danger, you don't know that song. You never studied history, and you never learned the music that prevailed during Joan of Sons of Toil and Danger, will you serve a stranger? Fight, fight, fight for Burgundy. Sons of shame and sorrow, will you cheer tomorrow? Fight, fight, fight for Burgundy. Onward, forward, mighty soldiers go. Mighty soldiers, the lily banners flow. Sons of France surround us, join them. Can you get the spirit, this enthusiasm, this excitement? The charismatic movement is created because there's a charismatic leader who emerges, get this, at a time of crisis. The time of crisis is crucial. Get this. The charismatic leader will have no effect unless the society is in a time of crisis. That's what happened with Joan of Arc. That's what happened with Hitler. At a time of crisis, the charismatic personality might emerge. Is there a crisis and no charismatic personality arise? Of course there is. Are there charismatic personalities arise and there is no crisis? Of course there is. A good example of that is the Protestant Reformation. When Martin Luther was in trial at the Diet of Worms, they accused him of being a Hussite, a Reformed theologian who had come on the scene about 90 years earlier, said exactly the same things that Luther said. Luther had never heard of him before. The guy was there. He was a charismatic personality. He had a great message, but the times weren't ripe. That's the factor. Not only do you need a charismatic personality, but the second characteristic is you must have elective affinity. There must be a relationship between the charismatic personality on the one hand and the social situation on the other. Does the social situation require a charismatic? Things are so desperate that everybody's looking for a leader. The Bible picks up the same theme. Jesus wasn't born at any old time. Here's what it says. And he was born, and this is where Weber gets the concept out of the Bible. He was born in the fullness of time, at the right social, psychological moment. It was a perfect moment to be born. He was born at the right place and at the right time. Have you got that? Very important. So Jesus falls into the category of a charismatic personality. Have you got it? Second characteristic of changing society. First, you need a charismatic personality. Secondly, you need a social situation that expresses elective affinity for change. And hence the charismatic personality comes at the right place at the right time. One has to ask a very simple question. If Hitler had arisen at a different time in our German history, would he have been able to create the movement? And the answer is no. And no sociologist would say yes to that. He appeared for the, depending on your views of Nazism, which mine are very negative, he appeared at the right place at the right time with the right message. I mean, there it is. So you got elective affinity as characteristic number 2. Have you got that down pat? So you got 2 things. The third thing, you have to have a relevant idea. Note, a great revolution does not break loose unless there's a whole new idea that reinterprets the world, that is. An idea that reinterprets the world. That's why Marxists would never talk about ideas, they talk about ideologies. There are ideas that give momentum to a movement. One of the great experiences I had, and I've had a good life with a lot of great experiences, I was asked to lecture at Autonomous University in the Dominican Republic. This was back in the 60s. So I'm walking with the rector of the university to the lecture hall. This school is slightly to the left of Mao. I mean, it's a leftist school. I was going to lecture in Che Guevara Hall. It gives you some idea as to the nature of this university. Just before I get to the classroom, a very polite students confront me and say, before you begin your lecture, just to clarify things, as a sociologist, do you believe in Darwin or Lamarck? So what do you mean? Do you believe in Darwin's theory of evolution? I said, I'm not sure I understand this. I said, well, look at it this way. When you went to school in the United States, they taught you Darwin. Darwin is built on one principle: natural selection, better defined by Spencer as the survival of the fittest. In the natural world, there are limited resources. Every species, according to Thomas Malthus, another sociologist — I wish I could teach you a course in sociology so we could go through all the major social theorists, because you're going to be crippled, because you're going to be studying social change and you don't know all the theorists. Malthus contended that under ideal conditions, population will grow in a geometric progression until it exhausts the capacity for sustenance. Population will keep on growing and growing and growing and growing. So you talk about a population expansion. The population gets so large that there's not enough resources to keep the population going. in which case people turn on each other. And there's a struggle for survival. And who survives? The fittest. And the unfit die off, and only the fit are able to reproduce. And then the process occurs again. And again you reach a point of optimum. And the struggle occurs. And so again, only the superior survive and reproduce. So you got a succession of stages. Each stage, what? The superior survive. The inferior die off. You can see what's going to happen according to Darwin. You get more and more of a superior group of people emerging upward, 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 upward. Evolution. Survival of the fittest. And I say, and what's this got to do with sociology? Don't you understand, doctor? They pretended they were teaching you biology. They weren't teaching you biology. They were teaching you economics. When you walk into your political science or economics class and heard about capitalism, it seemed like the only reasonable explanation of how things are. That in capitalism, you have survival of the fittest. I heard Ron Paul talking about Obamacare. And who's the guy that's on late afternoon on CNN?
Sean Haggerty?
Not Haggerty. The guy that does the news starting at about 5 o'clock. I'll think of it in a minute. But at any rate, well, let me move on. Here you got it. You got this situation where you're talking about survival of the fittest. And Ron Paul, the extreme conservative, is being interviewed. And so the question is asked about medical care. Well, what should we do to these people who can't afford medical care? Well, he said, this is a free country. These people should have gotten jobs and enough money to buy medical insurance. But there are people who can't do that. They're maybe not intelligent enough in this highly technological society to get jobs. They don't have jobs. They don't have a means of income. They're poor. They can't afford medical care. What should happen to them? And without blinking, Ron Paul said, I guess they should die. It's called social Darwinism. It moves from being a biological theory into being a sociological theory. That the inferior people should die. We don't need them. Let me ask you this. You're an American, right? Steve, how much of your tuition is going to be paid by the U.S. government?
Right now, a little bit, but I'll be paying a lot more back to them.
You're right. You may get a loan from them,
Yeah.
and they think they're doing you a favor. You know what's wrong with you, Steve? You're not mentally retarded. Because if you were mentally retarded, the U.S. government would spend tens of thousands of dollars a year to educate you. And the conservative says, think of the absurdity of this. We're spending tens of thousands of dollars to educate a guy with an IQ of 55, and we're not spending anything on Steve, who has an IQ, looking at you, about 130. Is there something absurd about this? Spending no money on the inferior, and what's more is, guess where they get the money to spend on the inferior? They get it from people like you. You end up paying taxes to educate people who are stupid. And you who are intelligent, what do you get from the U.S. government? Nothing. Now I'm putting it in very ugly terms. But stand back, doesn't it seem reasonable to say there's something wrong with a system that takes resources from the successful people and spend it on the inferior people who can't get jobs, who have no ambition, who sit around? Is this the kind of society you want? Will it come to a collapse sooner or later? As people like Charles Murray say, will it come to a collapse sooner or later if we can spend more and more on the inferior people, taking the resources from the superior people? Don't you see what's going? And don't you understand the Tea Party? They make all the sense in the world once you accept Darwin. Incidentally, if you study the rise of Nazism, it was built on Darwin's theory of evolution. I mean, he would quote from Darwin all the time in his speeches. Darwin was the basis for belief. If you believe in evolution, is it? Here's the quote from Nietzsche, who was Hitler's favorite philosopher. Here's this quote from Thus Spake Zarathustra. If it was the destiny of the ape to transcend itself and produce man, is it not the destiny of man to transcend himself and produce the Superman? If evolution raised apes to being human beings, is it not reasonable to assume that the evolutionary process will continue and man will produce the Superman? Inevitable. It makes all the logical sense in the world. The minute you accepted Darwin, you're in the back pocket of those who believe in the superiority of races. I wrote an editorial for the Philadelphia Inquirer, tongue-in-cheek, in the midst of the big argument over teaching intelligent design in the public school system. And I said, we should never teach Darwin, because Darwin was a racist. Man, the articles I got from science teachers all over the country, and I was waiting for them, because I had our office Xerox copies of certain pages in the Origin of Species, and even worse, from Darwin's second book, The Descent of Man. I mean, if you want racism, blatant, he points out that there are certain races that are biologically inferior. And he points to two of them and says, if we're going to survive on this planet, we must liquidate these races. Black people in Africa need to be eliminated. I think we have at least one person here from Africa. Got to be wiped off the face of the earth. Got to get rid of them. Got to get rid of them. The other group, and this actually became policy under Queen Victoria, the Aboriginal people of Australia. And so it was the official government policy to liquidate the Aboriginal people. If you go to Australia today and go and talk to the Aboriginal people, they will tell you exactly what happened. That you could go out and kill an Aboriginal citizen, and it wouldn't be a crime. You were hunted for them, like you go out hunting for animals. And they took the best representatives of the Aboriginal people, pulled them away from their families, and put them with white families, hoping that somehow they could be socialized out of their Aboriginal view. Go to Australia and listen to the tears. Listen to the tears of the Aboriginal people. An incredible situation. Please don't think that ideas do not have social consequences or do not affect social policy. But Darwin, incidentally, you all probably know about the great trial between Scopes, who was a teacher in Tennessee, and had the audacity to teach evolution contrary to Tennessee law. And he was defended by Clarence Darrow, the most famous lawyer of the time. On the other side was an equally famous lawyer, and that was William Jennings Bryan, 3 times the candidate for the presidency on behalf of the Democratic Party. The only reason why he was defeated, interestingly enough, is because 3 men got together. Carnegie, let me think of who they were. It was Carnegie, it was J.P. Morgan, and Ford. The 3 of them got together, and it was the first time the election was bought. And they began buying up newspapers and running stories, diminishing William Jennings Bryan. You can get the PBS special, the first election that was bought. The guys put millions of dollars into it because William Jennings Bryan wanted, in fact, controls on the big corporations who he felt were taking over America. And the economic system was taking over the political system. And he wanted to bring an end to it. And incidentally, he was a committed Christian. A lot of people think that William Jennings Bryan believed in a 6-day creation. He did not. He believed that there was a process of creation that extended over thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years. The reason why he was against the teaching of evolution is because he had just returned from Germany. And when he was talking to the German militarists, they said to him, if you believe in evolution, you should be in favor of war. Stop to think about it. War is a means whereby superior groups of people eliminate inferior groups of people. If you believe in evolution on the societal level, isn't war a good thing? Isn't it getting rid of the weaker army, the weaker people, the people that aren't smart enough and strong enough to stand against the superior group? They should be eliminated, and that's the way society improves. He came back with that and said, this is dangerous. And it's one thing to talk about biology. It's another thing to say, when you begin to apply these ideas on the societal level, you run into danger. I contend that the United States of America right now is buying into social Darwinism at a rate that staggers the imagination. And so I asked these students, okay, you got me. It's true. Darwin, if you apply it on the societal level, does in fact make capitalism a reasonable ideology. You know, that here are all these businesses out here. The best businesses survive. The inadequate businesses go out. They cease to exist. They go bankrupt. An economy that says is that the best economic systems are the ones that survive, and it's a good thing to get rid of the others. Perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable. But I said, if you don't accept Darwin, what do you believe? And they said, well, Lamarck, of course. Well, I think I remember something about Lamarck. And then I remembered, when I was studying anthropology, Ashley Montague, who was an anthropologist who picked up on Darwin. And here's what he says. The difference between the lowest form of life and the higher forms of life is dependent not on competition, not on laissez-faire competition, which is what Darwin is all about. Let the species compete with one another without interference, and you'll get a superior race. Marx says it's not built on competition, it's built on cooperation. The lowest form of life is the amoeba, a one-cellular unit. But there comes a point at which the amoeba gives up its individuality and joins with other one-celled animals. And you end up with a metazoan. And the superiority of the metazoan over the protozoan is all too obvious. Its chances for survival are greater. And as you move up the phylogenetic scale, you run into arrangements with higher and higher levels of cooperation until you get to a human being, which is billions of cells brilliantly cooperating with each other, creating a superior species. In short, evolution is dependent on cooperation, not competition. Let me ask you, doesn't that sound as rational and as reasonable? That as you look at the phylogenetic scale, isn't it true? That as you move into higher and higher levels of species, you have higher and higher levels of cooperation until you get to the anthropologist, sociologist, theologian, Teilhard de Chardin of the Jesuits, who says in the next step is when human beings come together in a cooperative entity. And we have the next stage of evolution when human beings enter into cooperative relationships. And like cellular units becoming cooperative, so human beings become cooperative. And we have the Omega Man, which is yet to come. The harmonious cooperation. So you get these differing views, ideologies. Ideas are important. Please note this. Ideas are important. Marx would say, not so. Not so, and I'll explain why he says not so. Not so. Ideas are important. In fact, Weber is going to contend that capitalism would not exist. He doesn't say this outright, and those who know Weber well would disagree with me. But he did write a book called Capitalism and the Protestant Ethic. It's a classic in economics, showing the relationship between Protestant theology and modern Western capitalism. Let me just show you the difference between the two. The purest form of Protestantism, the one that will create the most wealth and the greatest economic development, the religion that will do the best is Presbyterianism. You want rich people? Make them into Calvinists. And in this book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, I'm simplifying this to be sure. There are 4 factors that are important in Protestantism. These are things you should know, because somewhere down the line, somebody's going to ask you about social change and how ideas work, and how did Protestantism contribute to economic prosperity and development. And in economic development, I'm going to point out at the end of our time together, the ideal person that I want you to raise up when you do economic development among the poor is a person who for half of his life is Pentecostal and the second half of his life is Calvinistic. And I'll point out why those two are important. But Calvinism, he saw Calvinism. He looked over Europe and he saw that certain nations of Europe were always making incredible progress economically. Other nations, not doing well at all. Germany. You bomb Germany into oblivion, 25 years later, it's an industrial machine humming with great effectiveness. Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. What do all these countries have in common? First sociological question. They're all Protestant nations and have a Protestant ethos. Look at the poor countries of Europe. Italy, Spain, to a lesser degree, but only because they don't believe much of anything, France. You look at the countries, Portugal. Who's in Portugal? Who's from Portugal? Somebody spent some time in Portugal. Okay. Oh, David Broncomo was a missionary in Portugal. That's it. They're all poor countries, and they never seem to get out of their poverty. What is it that the poor countries have in common? They're all Catholic. What do the rich countries have in common? They're all Protestant. Is there a relationship between Protestantism and economic prosperity? These are theological ideas. He then looks at Protestantism and says there are certain forms of Protestantism that are better than others. When you talk about collecting wealth, the most money in the world is concentrated in what city? Geneva, Switzerland. We all talk about the Swiss banks. Wealth has accumulated there. By the way, where did Presbyterianism, where did Calvinism begin? In what city? Geneva. As a matter of fact, the youth fellowship groups in Presbyterian churches call themselves the Geneva Fellowship. There they are. Lutheranism does okay, but not as good as Calvinism. And so while Germany is prosperous, it's not as prosperous as Geneva. I mean, Geneva really doesn't. Methodism, lower down the line. And so you, in fact, can say the religious beliefs of a societal system the ideas of those systems will influence economic productivity. Now, I want to explain to you how Calvinism creates a way of thinking that generates wealth. Calvinists, as you know, if you know anything about Calvinism, believe in predestination. That whether you're saved or whether you're not saved, whether you become a Christian or don't become a Christian, is up to God. God chooses. Does God know everything? Answer, yes. Because they didn't have Einstein's concept of time. Does God know before you're born whether you're going to be a Christian? Well, if God knows everything, the answer to that has to be what? Yes. Well, if God knows you're going to be a Christian before you were ever born, do you have any choice? And if God knows you're not going to become a Christian before you're ever born, do you have a choice? No. Those that are saved are predestined to be saved. Now that's the first postulate. The second one is interesting. Every Calvinist suffers from a bit of anxiety. Unlike the Pentecostal, he knows he's filled with the Holy Spirit. For what reason? He feels it. He speaks in tongues. He feels the energy of God flowing. He goes into a trance. I mean, he knows he's been hit by the Spirit. He's been zapped. He knows because of his experience. But Presbyterians, they have no experience at all. Man, have you ever preached in a Presbyterian church? Jeez. They give you an order of worship. It begins at 11 o'clock, it ends at 12. And if the Holy Spirit wants to move, he would have to clear it through 3 committees. The biggest idea is, in the Presbyterian, everything is done decently and in order. Forget this mystical experience. Forget this charismatic stuff. People speaking in tongues, miracles. That doesn't fit into a rational system of thought. And Presbyterianism, better than anything else, is rational. If you go to Princeton Seminary, you will study what? Systematic theology. You're going to reduce God to a system. Think of the absurdity of that. We got it figured out. We know all about God. We know about the second coming. We know about everything. We got it down to a system. The people don't stand back and laugh is amazing to me. Systematic theology. Jeez. What a man. It's time to think about that. Everybody is predestined, that's going to be saved, is predestined to be saved, but there's a problem here. How do you know whether you're predestined for salvation? How can you be sure you're one of the elect, to use Presbyterian terms? Well, there's an answer to that in Calvin. Those who God has chosen, are you ready for this? This is shocking when I say it. Those who are chosen will economically prosper. Economic prosperity is a sign of divine election. Please, you don't have to go further than watching a Christian television in America with this prosperity theology. If you trust in God, if you put your faith in God, if you give your life over to God, you're going to prosper. Places like Haiti, nations in Africa, are filled with these prosperity theologians who promise that if you come to church, if you tithe, if you give yourself to Jesus, you're going to get rich, you're not going to get AIDS, everything's going to turn out right. God heals those who have AIDS, if they get right with God. God prospers. You're poor, don't worry about it. Just come down the aisle, and just as I am, and you'll prosper. And so you get a prosperity theology. The Calvinists invented it. Who God has elected, God has chosen, he prospers. Now, don't get too uppity. Let's go back to the Old Testament. All through the Old Testament, Israel knows whether it's right with God. Why? Because when Israel is right with God, what happens to Israel? It prospers. When it gets out of the will of God, what happens? There are famines. The enemy armies come in and conquer. In reality, the Jews always knew what their relationship was with God by the condition of the country. If we were right with God, and so in fact, when the armies of Sennacherib surround Jerusalem, the leader, the prophet says what? Don't worry about how many armies you got, how many bows and arrows you have. If you trust in God, he will deliver us. God is our deliverer. God will protect us. God will make us rich. God will prosper us. And if you go and read the sermons from the New England Puritan preachers, this is what graduate students do, you'll find that they're all based on Old Testament passages. And when you listen to these suckers on television who are preaching a prosperity theology, they all take their text out of the Old Testament. Because in the Hebrew cosmology, those who were right with God got rich and were protected. Those who weren't right with God got afflicted and they became poor. It's as simple as that. So prosperity becomes a sign of divine election. Whew. So in America, which is highly Calvinistic in its ethos, even though most people don't think about it, was founded by Puritans. And that ethos pervades the country. In America, it's not only inconvenient to be poor, it's downright immoral. You're not a very good person. If you were a good person, you wouldn't be poor. Poverty is associated with laziness and a lot of other things. But if you're right with God, this wouldn't happen. Next characteristic, third characteristic of Calvinism. Yes?
Yeah, it's interesting that you've said that. You know, in Africa, our traditional belief system, they also have kind of a predestination to it.
Yeah.
We believe that the gods determined our fate. So there's a lot of fatalism. That there's nothing I can do to change my situation.
There's a fatalism here.
Yeah.
God help us.
Yeah.
And you won't understand how we get out of fatalism in Calvinism until I get to the third point.
Okay.
The third point is, the Calvinist says that everybody's vocation is a calling from God. It's not just a preacher that's called. It's not just a missionary that's called. But the guy who's a medical doctor, the man who's a factory worker, each of us is called. The priesthood of all believers. We're all called. So your work is a divine calling. And so the sermon goes something like this. What you do on Sunday is important. But I'll tell you what's really important. Whether you're a Christian or not will be evident in the way in which you work on Monday morning. When you go into that factory, when you go to that office, do you work as unto the Lord? Whatsoever a man doeth, I'm quoting scripture, in word or in deed, let him do it as unto the Lord and not as unto men. Now if you can convince the worker that when he goes to work, his job is a divine calling, and his faithfulness to God will be expressed in how well he does his work and how dedicated he is to his work. Have you produced a great producer? Have you produced a great factory worker, a great artisan? If your work is an expression of your calling from God, your calling from God, this isn't just a means of making money. It's a calling from God. That's why older people in my generation have a hard time dealing with young people. Because you know what you people work for? Money. You work for money. We went to work no matter what because we knew that idle hands were the devil's tools. The stitch in time saved 9. Work, a rolling stone gathers no moss. Work. I remember singing, work for the night is coming. You don't even know these songs anymore. Work for the night is coming when no work is done. Scared. Work, 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 work. Go, 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 go. A Calvinist cannot go on vacation. I mean, Calvinist going on vacation. You know, gets his kid up 6 in the morning. Wakes his kid up 6 in the morning. Want to get an early start? Jeez, you're on vacation. Get an early start. Poor kid. You know, all right. Gets dressed, gets down. He says, when you get in that car, 2 things will be true. The gasoline tank will be full, and your bladders will be empty. And we will drive and drive and drive until 2 things are true. The gasoline tank will be empty, and then, do you hear me? Only then will your bladder be allowed to be full. You say, what if my bladder gets full before the gasoline tank? May God have mercy on you. I mean, most Presbyterians, when they go on vacation, work harder. You know, the worst thing you can say if you're a Presbyterian, you had 2 weeks off, what did you do? You know what the worst thing you can say is? Nothing. Now, I'm Italian. I come out of a Catholic community. We think spending 2 weeks doing nothing that's a hoot, man. You mean you just laid around the house and, you know, and made love to your wife and ate good meals and did a little pasta on the side? Oh, this is great, man. Enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. You know, take it easy, man. You know, we're Italians. We let it up to the Germans to work their heads off. Let the Swiss beat their heads in. That's not for us. If you go across the border from Switzerland to Italy, the shock change is overwhelming. You know, everything is, I mean, I feel like all of Switzerland needs an enema. I mean, the whole place is uptight. You know, got to, jeez, man, it's scary. I'm so relaxed. When people take the tour of Europe, what did you like? Well, we really enjoyed the museum, the technical museum in Frankfurt. That's a great museum, in Munich rather. A great museum. We love the palaces. We love, but which people? Oh, we love the people of Italy. That's right. You know, they want to dance in the middle of the street. The song, hey, take it easy, calm down. Nobody working so hard. Come on. Yeah, you know, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. That's the Italian. We know how to relax. Swiss do not know how to relax. And the German Swiss are the worst. They don't know how to relax. Go, 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 go. Work, 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 work. Work, 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 work. Jeez, holy mackerel, Charlie. Stop it. But do these people become economically productive? If you have factory workers, office workers, who are intense and see their job, even on a subconscious level, because now in these countries have been secularized, they think they're finished with it. No, the Calvinistic ethos operates on a subconscious level. As Benjamin Franklin once said, that very often Calvinism can become detached from its religious moorings. In short, people are still Calvinist, even though they don't believe in Calvin anymore. But on a subconscious level, those values are still there. Work, work, work. Last thing, the doctrine of thrift. The doctrine of thrift. That is, if you see your job as a divine calling, and you work hard, and you never let up, chances are you're going to make a lot of money. Bad news. After you make it, you're not allowed to spend it. Because you were all raised on the same parable. A certain man went on a long journey. And the one he gave 10 talents, the one 5 talents, the one 1 talent. The 10-talent man did what? He invested it. Oh, that sounds good. And when the master returned, he had 10 talents more. 5-talent man saved, invested it. The 2-talent man invested it, came back with 2 talents more. 1-talent man did what? Buried it in the ground. He didn't lose anything. And he's thrown into outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Do you get it? I love the fact that one kid said, I asked my Sunday school teacher, what happens to those in heaven that are toothless? He said, and the teacher told him, on that day teeth will be provided. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. There you have it. But the concept is that if you make money, you're not to spend it. You're not even supposed to bury it. You're supposed to invest it and produce a profit for the master. Got it? Why is it that we always were taught that parable and not the parable of a certain man went out and hired somebody at 9 in the morning promising to pay him $10, another one at noon, $10, one at 3 o'clock, $10, one at 5 o'clock, $10, I'll hire you for the 6 o'clock, he calls them all in and gives them all $10 apiece. And we don't preach that parable because it sounds like communism. From each according to his ability to each according to his need. It's interesting which passages of the Bible we select to support our political economic theories, you see. Now, let's put it together. A man looks at his job as a calling and works with intensity and increased dedication. He's going to make money. But he's not going to spend it. He's going to invest it. Given those two factors, what's going to happen? He's going to accumulate wealth. More and more and more and more. And the more wealth he accumulates, the more convinced he is what? One of the elect. His prosperity, coming from his hard work and his thrift, will in fact give him assurance. And so rich people continue to work hard. Warren Buffett goes on making money. He couldn't possibly spend what he has. But he keeps on making money. Why? Because the more money you are, the more your identity in a spiritual sense is affirmed. Economic prosperity is a sign of divine election. In your church, if you're here in the United States, who gets elected to the Board of Deacons? The president of the First National Bank or the guy that's unemployed living on welfare? Who are you going to elect to the Board of Deacons who are going to be the spiritual leaders of the church? Be honest. The guy that's on welfare isn't going to get elected. It's going to be the president of the First National Bank. Man, that's what it's about. And we say we're Christian. This has nothing to do with Jesus. This has to do with what people have done with Jesus. Yes?
It's funny that that comes from a Calvinist line of thinking, because Calvinist was one that was known to oppose the book of James where it talks about works.
Yeah.
And now...
Calvin hated James.
Right.
He hated James. Because James says, woe unto you who are rich. Yeah. Remember that passage? Woe unto you. Your riches howl out against you. If you want a book that really takes after rich people, it's the book of James. Do you understand why both he and Luther called it that straw epistle? He wouldn't include it in the canon, neither would Calvin. It doesn't belong in the Bible. Why? Because it calls rich people to accountability. No, we don't want that in the Bible. We want that 10-count, 5-count, 2-count. That's good. Put that in. We don't want this other stuff in. You're absolutely on target in that. Begin to see things falling in place as you see how ideologies work in a society to produce incredible wealth. Incredible wealth. Incredible wealth. This is what the Protestant ethic does. It gives people a sense of calling about their jobs, make them very diligent in their labors. And so a true Calvinist will work even when he doesn't have to work. A true Calvinist cannot retire. You know people, if you go to a Calvinistic church, when it's time for 60, I'm a good example. I'm almost, in a few more months, I'll be 80 years old. I'm beyond 79. I should have retired a long time ago. I can't stop. Why? Because I'll feel guilty. I had a calling and I'm not living out my calling. You know, you feel guilty. You say, but you're intellectual. You know better than that. It's one thing to know it on the manifest level. It's another thing to feel it in the depths of your being. When I'm not working, I don't feel good. And you're no different. You go through final exams, you're working. 10 hours study every day and to get through exams. And you can't wait till that final exam is taken and you're free. And you say, what are you going to do tomorrow? Nothing, man. I'm going to lie in bed. And you lie in bed, and about 9:30 in the morning, you're feeling depressed. Is this not true? You feel depressed. Well, why are you depressed? I don't know. You were waiting for this. This is what you wanted, to do nothing. You just can't handle doing nothing. You just... The accumulation of wealth. You're not allowed to spend it either. I had my daughter on a Gray Line tour of Chicago, and we came to this section in Tower Town where there's a movie theater. And in the alley alongside of the movie theater, there was an alley. And the tour guide stopped the bus, points to the alley, and says, "Do you see that alley?" It was in that alley that the FBI gunned to death John Dillinger, America's foremost gangster. Gunned to death. He had robbed hundreds of thousands of dollars from banks throughout the Midwest. But when they shot him, and when he died, he only had 32 cents left to his name. He had spent it all in lascivious living. And my 9-year-old daughter said in a whisper that was loud enough for everybody in the bus to hear, when he got shut down, he only had 32 cents left. He had spent all of that money on lavish living. And my daughter said, "What great timing." I mean, do you see the logic of it? I mean, that's when you want to get killed, right? When the money's running out. When you got $1 million in your pocket, you don't want to die then. You want to spend it and enjoy it. Then let them kill me. I mean, the idea, and they say something, and when he died penniless. I got in my will, all my money gets given away to a lot of missionary causes. My son said, "What about us?" I said, "You and Lisa, when I die, I don't want anybody to be happy." The truth is, this is the Protestant work ethic. Now take the Catholics. It's a completely different thing. The sign you're right with God is not that you're rich. The sign that you're right with God is that you're poor. Every priest has to take the vow of poverty. The hero of Catholicism is what? St. Francis of Assisi. He's the hero. And what did he do with all of his father's money? He gave it away to poor people. He was always giving away wealth. Well, you know, I got to tell you, if you're giving away your money and not investing it, you're not going to stay rich very long. Catholics know how to enjoy money. I go to the Dominican Republic. They have a lottery there, as they do in most Latin American countries. When somebody hits the lottery, what does he do? Does he invest it? No, he goes back to the barrio, the slum where he lives, and they bring in the band, and they bring in food. And Haiti's no different. And they have a party, and everybody in the village sings and dances and hugs each other. And they have a great celebration. You say, "You idiot, don't you realize your money's going to run out?" Yeah, it's going to run out. But look at the great time we're having. Isn't this wonderful? Join in the party. Join in the celebration. Johnny won the lottery, and we're all sharing, get this, sharing in his good fortune. And not the Calvinist. It's so individualistic. The only person that's going to share in my good fortune is, guess who? Me. I won the lottery. I'm going to invest it. So I'll have even more money for me. Jeez. Catholicism is very attractive. It doesn't make for economic prosperity. It makes for great partying. And anybody that goes to a Latin American country Anybody that goes to Italy, goes to Spain, goes to Portugal, will immediately feel the difference. The whole country is like in one gigantic party all the time. You go down to the plaza at night, everybody's there, singing and dancing and having a great time, and there's music in the air. And it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, the joy. People always say, you know, I went to Mexico, and I went to this poor village, and the people had nothing. And you know what? They seem happier than the people that live in my wealthy community here in the United States. I mean, there was more joy there than there is in my neighborhood. Yeah. You don't understand, do you? Wealth is something to enjoy. It's something to be shared. And that generates happiness. If you're going to hoard it into your own pocket, it rots. I like the line from Hello, Dolly, where Dolly says, money is a lot like manure. If you spread it out, it does a lot of good. But if you let it pile up in one place, it stinks. Good line. Good line. Two different ideologies. The Catholic ideology, which makes poverty the sign of God's favor, that makes giving to the poor evidence that you're doing God's will, that looks upon work as something you have to do. As a matter of fact, the Catholics have two categories of people. The religious people, they call them, he's going to be a religious. That means he's going to be a monk or a priest, or a woman, a convent, as a nun, or as a sister of mercy. Has a religious vocation. And then there are those that they say have secular vocations. We don't expect them to be spiritual in the same way that the religious people are. We have a hierarchy. Those who are super religious, those who kind of do what they have to do to get by. What a difference. What a difference between them and the Protestants is everybody's a priest. Everybody's religious. Everybody's a priest before God. Let me just say, I happen to like that part of the Protestant ethic that calls each of us to see that our calling is of God, and that whatever we do, we should do as a service to God. I think that's right out of the Bible. I also agree with the Catholics. But the primary thing to do with wealth is to minister to the poor. To minister to the poor. And that's what Easter has been about. It's about saying, what are we going to do for the poor of the world, and how are we going to do it? And economic development, which looks like capitalism, is only moderately capitalistic. Because I hope that by the time you finish studying here, your attempts to create businesses in third world countries or in the inner city will not be primarily to accumulate a profit for yourself, but to create meaningful work for poor people and enable them to live with dignity. That should be your motivation. I would always say to students like you, you can't be a Christian and be a communist, and you can't be a Christian and be a capitalist. I don't believe in totalitarian control from the top down. I think the Garden of Eden is a story about a God who gives people freedom to make the decisions that determine their own destiny. And in a Marxist totalitarian state, as existed in the Soviet Union, and as exists in Cuba today, people don't have the right to make decisions. The state makes decisions for you. I don't believe in communism in that way, nor do I believe in capitalism. Take any economics course, and in describing capitalism, the first thing they will say is, the motive for production, the thing that makes the system go, the motive for production is one word: profits. All you'll ever hear from the capitalist is the profit motive. The profit motive. The profit motive. That's what makes the system go. I say as a Christian, your economic activities should not be designed to maximize profits. Your economic activities should be built on this motivation: to meet people's needs. Sometimes you can make a lot of profit without meeting anybody's needs. My wife has bought her last car. It's a terrible feeling when you're at our age. Says we keep a car somewhere between 10 and 15 years. When you buy a car and you think 15 years from now, let's see, I'm going on to 80, 95, I don't think I'm going to make it. If I do, thank you, Jesus. But if I make it to 95, I won't be driving anymore. This is my last car. We always buy second-hand cars. So we go to Enterprise. And for a really nice price, I mean, really, you couldn't get a Ford Escort for what we got as a not quite a year old Chrysler 300. That's the biggest one they have. It's got more gadgets on that thing than you can possibly imagine. I'm sure she'll never learn how to use them all. And the point is, do you really need all of these things? The car doesn't have a key. You have this little thing, and if you get within 5 feet of the car, the doors are open automatically. That's it. You say, what's the point? Well, you don't have to put the key in. Oh, wow, that's bad. Actually, my Ford has a little button on where I can push it and open the door. Yeah, but you got to push the button. Here, you don't have to do anything. You just have to get within 5 feet of the car, and the doors will open. I mean, you really need that. We have 3 television sets in our house. They were given to us by people who got rid of them. Are you ready for this? Because they have curved screens. And these people had to get rid of these because they needed a flat screen. Wow. There's a real need. So the guy gets rid of and gives me a wonderful television, good-sized television, as a gift. Say, look, I don't know what to do with it. You can't throw them away anymore. Would you like to have my TV? Yeah, I'll take your TV, free of charge, because it has a curved screen. Now let me break it to you. Do you really need a curved screen? You drive in any city in America, and you will find these storage places where people can rent out space and store the stuff that won't fit into their house. Stop to think of the absurdity of this. You got so much stuff, you can't squeeze it into your house, so you rent space to store it. And you pay a monthly fee for somebody to keep the stuff that you can't use. You say, what should we do? Jesus said, sell it and give the money to the poor. Doesn't he say that? Sell it and give the money to the poor. Lenny Bruce, one of America's foremost obscene comedians, once said, whenever I meet a Baptist minister with 2 coats, I know I'm dealing with a hustler. You know what he's referring to, don't you? I'm preaching Jesus. You got 2 coats? Well, you're not preaching Jesus. You got 2 coats. Jesus said, if you had 2 coats, what should you do? Now the question. When you work, because it's a calling of God, you should be producing stuff that meets people's needs. And most of the stuff that we produce in today's society is stuff that nobody needs. And we're using up non-renewable resources in order to produce stuff that nobody needs, while most of the world doesn't have what they basically need. Is this not true? Is there something immoral about capitalism? If the purpose of production is profit, and let me just say, there's more profit to be made in putting gadgets into a Chrysler 300 than there is in producing a tractor that could be sold for $500 to a poor family who's farming in a third world country. More profit to be made on the Chrysler. And so our whole economy is oriented to maximizing profits, producing stuff, here it comes, that nobody needs. Consider this in our capitalistic society. You're going to have a problem with Christmas. You'll have money to buy presents for the people that you love. But here's the question. What do you buy for people who have everything? The answer to that should be obvious. What should you buy for people that have everything? Nothing. But you haven't got the guts to pull it off. You haven't had the guts to, on Christmas morning, when they come down, say, there's nothing for you under the tree. Nobody in this family's getting anything because everybody in this family's got everything. That's it. No. You will go to the department store. You will walk up and down the aisles. And because you're religious, you will pray. Then somebody, somewhere, invented something that nobody needs, so you can give it to the person who has everything. You say you're making the American economic system sound absurd. It is absurd. And I hope by the time you finish this course of study, you're able to stand back and see the absurdity of our consumeristic society and the obscenity of our consumeristic society in a world where there's such desperate need among the poor. And if you don't come away upset with America, there's something wrong with you. Or there's something wrong with us, and that we didn't do the job we should have done. There needs to be a charismatic personality. But the charismatic personality has to arrive at the right time, at the time of crisis. The charismatic personality must come with a new ideology, Calvinism, with capitalism. A new way of thinking. A new way of interpreting reality. When I gave you the bit about Lamarck and Darwin, are both not equally logical? And when I asked the student, okay, you've got Lamarck, I've got Darwin, which one is true? And he looked at me, and here was this profundity of this student. He said, who cares? I don't care which is true. I am interested in which theory produces the best kind of society. Whoa! That was a slap in my face. He didn't want to know whether capitalism or Darwin was right. He wanted to know which system produces the kind of society that I want. And may I say, he's closer to understanding the kingdom of God than most of my Calvinistic friends in church. If the kingdom of God is where children do not die in infancy, that's what that guy wants. Where old people live out their lives in health and well-being, that's what he wants. Where everybody has a decent house, that's what he wants. Where everybody has a job and enjoys the fruit of his labor, that's what he wants. So who's more Christian? The guy that believes in Jesus or the guy that's following that other ideology? What we've got to do is come up with a whole Christian way of thinking about economics. When we say faith, reason, and justice, that's what we're talking about. We want a way of looking at the world that makes justice for the poor a primary obligation. And that's what I'm hoping you're going to go into. Now, the last little bit, before we go any further, questions at this point. Because I've talked about Weber and why I'm a Weberian. I think that you have to have, this course is designed to get you to think new ways. This course is designed, if you're not a charismatic personality, to be able to spot the charismatic personality, get behind him, nurture him or her, build him up, get him out there, articulating a new idea. Right now, there are a number of schools that have programs in third world economic development and microeconomic development. We were the first. We were also the first to articulate what is called red letter Christianity. If you go to the website, www.redletterchristians with an S, redletterchristians.org, you'll get in our blog and you'll find that there are people all over the world who are signing up to be red letter Christians. How many? A little over 5 million now, under the radar screen. There's only a couple of books on red letter Christianity. Shane Claiborne and I produced one of them, called The Red Letter Revolution.
It's awesome, by the way.
What's that?
It's awesome.
Did you like that book?
Read it a couple times.
It's just translated into about 5 other languages. I am going at the end of October to Switzerland, because there are 50 ministers there who want to become red letter Christians and want their churches to be red letter Christians. The Bishop of Chester, England, wants his whole diocese to become red letter Christians. And I'll explain the difference. Yes?
Can I just say one sentence
Yeah.
that summed up that book for me? Rebirth comes with obligation to hold on to our possessions a lot more loosely.
Yeah. Yeah. We are a selfish people. That's original sin.
Mhm.
Red letter Christianity. We got tired of using the word evangelical, even though that's what we believe. We take the Bible seriously. As much Bible as I've quoted in this sociological lecture, you ought to come to the conclusion this guy does take the Bible seriously. We believe that the Bible was written by people who were imbued with the Holy Spirit and guided what they wrote. We believe in the doctrines of the Apostles' Creed. We think that's a great summation of doctrine. Pretty close to the doctrinal statement of Eastern University. We believe that salvation comes by being filled with the Holy Spirit. By surrendering yourself to Christ. Having an encounter with Jesus. We don't think that simply accepting propositional doctrines makes you a Christian. We think that Jesus has to be encountered personally, spiritually. That you've got to know him, even as also I am known. You've got to have that relational thing. You say, well, that sounds evangelical. It would have up until about 10 years ago. There was a term that came into existence in the beginning of the 20th century. It was the word fundamentalist. Out of Germany, I keep on picking on Germany, I feel guilty having it here. There were a bunch of scholars that were avant-garde. Theologians like Schleiermacher, Ritschl, Biedermann. These were the modernist scholars. And they questioned all the doctrines of the faith. Certainly they questioned the divinity of Christ. Almost everything that is in the doctrinal creed, the Apostles' Creed was called into question. The virgin birth, certainly. They didn't believe any of this stuff. They believed that the Bible was a metaphor. There were also biblical scholars. The two most famous, Graf and Wellhausen. And they looked over the Old Testament and said, Moses didn't write the Pentateuch, but 7 different authors wrote the Pentateuch, and it was put together by what they called redactors. And so don't get the idea. They called into question the scriptures, they called into question the doctrines. It was called the modernist movement in religion. And it spread like wildfire across Germany, and everything the Americans know, they learned from the Germans. That's true. And it began to permeate America and American churches. And churches began to become modernist churches. A group of brilliant scholars got together and produced a set of essays that were published in a set of 12 books. A set of these 12 books was sent to every clergy person in America, Catholic, Protestant, Seventh-day Adventist, whatever you were. You got a set of these books, free of charge in the mail. Huge amounts of money were spent to get these 12 books sent. The name of these books were The Fundamentals of the Christian Faith. A preacher in New York City, at a very famous church, now Riverside Church, New York, Harry Emerson Fosdick, preached a sermon. And the title of the sermon was, Shall the Fundamentalist Win? It was the first time that the word had ever been used. Go to a dictionary earlier than 1929, you won't find the word in the dictionary. He invented the word. Fundamentalists were people who are committed to the fundamentals written in these books. I would have called myself a fundamentalist, and I did. The term served us well up until about 1950. By that time, a couple of things had happened. First, the Scopes trial on evolution, which made Christianity, evangelical Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, seem like it was anti-intellectual, anti-scientific. So that was the first, bad tag that was attached to the word fundamentalist. But throughout the 40s, fundamentalism got attached to a kind of personalistic pietism. We didn't drink wine. We didn't smoke cigarettes. We didn't dance. We didn't go to movies. I can remember my pastor saying, what if you are in the movies and the trumpet sounds and the Lord returns and you are in the movies when that happens? Next time I went to the movies, I was scared to death. I was sure that halfway through the flick, I'd hear a trumpet. Throughout eternity, I'd be grabbing people saying, do you know how that movie ended? Does anybody know? And dancing, oh, he was big on dancing. Dancing stimulates the lust of the flesh. Well, I got to tell you, My pastor was probably right. I mean, I watch these kids on television dancing. I mean, if you can stand in front of a woman vibrating like that for 3 hours and not be sexually turned on, you're not spiritual, you're dead. Do we understand each other? But we didn't dance, we didn't go to movies, we didn't drink booze, we didn't smoke. We used to have this ditty. We don't dance, we don't smoke, and we don't chew, and we don't date the girls who do. Another one was, my hope is built on nothing less than my Schofield notes and scripture press. Only those who understand Schofield Bibles will understand that.
That's what I
It was that's what you got, yeah. That's the fundamentalist textbook.
I'm not a fundamentalist.
Yeah, there you go. But that's a great line, you know. And my hope is built on nothing less. We used to sing, I hope it's built on nothing less than my Schofield notes and scripture press, which is the most fundamentalist. Incidentally, my first book ever published was published by Scripture Press. And the editor and some of the key people took me out to dinner after we had our last negotiations. And we're in this restaurant, and a woman comes over and says, anything from the bar? And the president of Scripture Press said, we're evangelical Christians. We don't drink in front of each other. What a great line. What a great line. But fundamentalism was not only anti-scientific and irrational, but it was labeled as being pietistically judgmental. Anybody who didn't do these things is going to hell. We knew the Catholics weren't Christians because they drank wine. And certainly Lutherans probably were in the same category. They drink wine too. And Germany was even worse. They not only drink wine, they drink beer. Jeez, Oktoberfest. It's a demonic orgy, that's what it is. I mean, that was Aristotle. And it was such a bad image. I mean, it had all this negative baggage. So in the early 1950s, Carl Henry, who was then the editor of Christianity Today magazine, and Billy Graham got together and said, we can't call ourselves fundamentalists. It has so many pejorative connotations. We need to come up with a new name. And they came up with the word evangelical. And so those of us who believe this old stuff, we said we're evangelicals. We're not against science, we're not against reason, and we're not a bunch of judgmental pietists. But we do believe in Jesus and the scriptures. And we believe in a personal relationship with Christ and the Apostles' Creed. And the word evangelical served us well until about 10 years ago. And then evangelicalism in the United States, and those of you from other countries will know this, became married to the right wing of the Republican Party. Basically, I would even say it's the Tea Party at prayer. Fundamentalists are over there. A survey done by the Pew Foundation says 82% of people who call themselves evangelicals would list themselves as conservative Republicans. So if I go to lecture at Harvard or Stanford, one of the sophisticated schools, and they introduce me as an evangelical, all the flags go up. The gays will picket the place. The feminists will be out there, they will come inside and scream during my lecture. You male chauvinistic pig, you know, you're oppressing us. Jeez. There's all these negative connotations. And we're standing back, and the gays see evangelicals as those who are going to destroy them, hate them. So when I go to Harvard to speak, the gay movement will be there, the feminists will be there, they'll all be there yelling and screaming. I don't want to call myself an evangelical anymore because it has all of these connotations. It doesn't say what I wanted to say. So a group of us were so upset we got together and decided, could we change the meaning of the word evangelical? We try. On radio shows, television shows, we say, you're wrong, there are all kinds of evangelicals. Well, less and less was that true. Used to be able to say, there are all kinds of evangelicals. When Clinton ran for president, 42% of those who voted for Clinton were evangelicals. So, you know, not anymore. When Obama ran for president, aside from the black church, all the white evangelicals voted for Bush, you know that. Go to a third world country, and you'll find out that when they meet American evangelicals, they're shocked how frozen we are in that right wing of the Republican Party. We said that's not who we are. We're not condemning people on the right. There are many evangelical Christians on the right as there are on the left, so far as we can see. I got to tell you this. The thing that makes Eastern so good is that they have many people on our faculty who are very conservative Republicans. The difference is that they're not suggesting that those who don't agree with them are not Christians. You saw a little conversation going on between me and David Bronkema. He's writing a book now, really doing a defense of conservatives in terms of social justice, and really raising some very serious questions about those who are liberal ideologically. And we're friends, and we support each other. So we don't fit into the mold, because the real right-wing person will have nothing to do with anybody who doesn't agree with their ideology. So we got together and we tried to change the meaning of the word. We did articles, we wrote books, it didn't do a thing. We decided we needed to come up with a new name. And in the meeting, Jim Wallace's associate, Dwayne, said, Jim, when you were in Nashville, Tennessee, you were on the radio, and secular Jewish country and western disc jockey, there's a combination, referred to you and people like you as being into the red letters of the Bible. You know, the old Bibles had the words of Jesus highlighted in red. You guys are into the red letters of the Bible. We looked at each other and said, you know, let's call ourselves red letter Christians. We didn't realize the profundity of that simple statement. We just stumbled into it because it sounded good. We're into the red letters of the Bible. Immediately, Christianity Today attacked us. And more specifically, attacked me as though I somehow was responsible. They should have picked on Jim. He was the guy that started. Campolo acts as though the red letters of the Bible are more important than the black letters. First accusation. After I thought for a minute or two, I said, you know, they're right. I do believe the red letters are more important than the black letters. As a matter of fact, Jesus believed that the red letters were more important than the black letters. How many times does he say in Matthew, you have heard of old. It was written by Moses. It was written of old. It was written in the past. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Sorry, I give you a new commandment. It's no longer an eye and eye, not tooth for a tooth. In short, he's contradicting Moses. That's gutsy, man. No wonder they wanted to crucify him. He contradicted. Just go. He's saying, the Bible says, you have to learn that you should hate your enemies. I say love your enemies. Overcome evil with good. Do good to those who would hurt you. Jeez. And you go through that list of the red letters. And you realize that the red letters of the Bible stand over and against American evangelicalism. The Pew Foundation takes a study of American evangelicals. 67% support capital punishment. That's way higher than the general population, which is now down to less than 50%. 67% of evangelicals believe in capital punishment. But Jesus said, blessed are the merciful. He did say that, remember that? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. You say, but somebody commits a capital crime, shouldn't there be capital punishment? Jesus says, no. It's no longer an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's over. That kind of thinking is gone. Gandhi once said, everybody knows what Jesus taught except for evangelical Christians. You know exactly what he meant. Is it possible for any Anabaptist, anybody Anabaptist, Mennonite, Church of the Brethren? We usually draw some of them. They would understand this. Can you read through the Sermon on the Mount and not come out committed to nonviolent resistance? When you read Jesus, can you come out believing that participating in war is a thing that a Christian can do? Whoa! And what does it say to do with your money? If any man would be my disciple, what should he do with it? Give to the poor, take up the cross and follow me. When you pray, go into the closet and shut the door. Go to the Sermon on the Mount. Let your yea be yea, your nay be nay. Go through the Sermon on the Mount and ask what this is all about. And so I go back to what Shane Claiborne did. I mentioned that earlier, remember? You think he was only kidding. You're not going to take him seriously. How seriously do you take Jesus? And if you take Jesus seriously, now this is a hard one for me to handle. I think our Bible department here has done as good a job as can be done in trying to deal with this. How do you reconcile the Jesus, the God that comes through Jesus, and the God in Joshua that kills all the Amalekites and Canaanites and every man, woman, child, kills everything in sight? Is this the same? Oh, no wonder there was a group of early Christians called Marcions who believed that there were two gods, the God of the Old Testament, God of the New Testament, because they saw. We've got to take our religion courses here. They do a good job of answering that question. But to take Jesus seriously, a friend of mine, who's part of the Red Letter Christian movement, is a guy named Richard Rohr. Any of you Catholic? Okay. Do you know Richard Rohr? Do you know who he is?
Vaguely.
Well, he's the best Catholic theologian writer of our time. He operates out of New Mexico in a place called a Center for Contemplation and Justice. He is very into St. Francis because he himself is a Franciscan. See. But Richard Rohr said, you know the difference between you Protestants and we Catholics? Particularly we Franciscans? I said, no, tell me. He said, well, Protestants get saved and they go to Bible studies. But every Bible study they go to is on Paul's epistles. And all their arguments are over Pauline doctrine. Stop to think about it. Women preachers? Where do you go to put down women preachers? You got to go to Paul's epistles. Want to put down gays? Where do you go? You know what Jesus says about gays? Nothing. Nothing. That's not on his Big Ten hit list for sins. Religious people who go around making life hell for everybody else, that's number one on his list. You'll agree on that, won't you? When it comes to condemning the Pharisees, who, as he says, lay heavy burdens on people and do nothing to lift those burdens. Man, he's tough on them. Woe unto you, he says. So you begin to ask the question. It's a good question. Pauline epistles. He said, and when you do get around to reading the Gospels, you take Jesus and you squeeze him into Pauline theological categories. Jesus has to fit into the theology of Paul. We Catholics, on the other hand, when we get saved, we read the Gospels. We get steeped in Jesus. And if we ever do get around to reading Paul, we always squeeze Paul into the categories of Jesus. I said, and? Well, he says there's no contradiction. There is a different emphasis. If you want to know about justification by faith, saved by grace through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast, you got to go to Paul. Jesus never says anything like that, right? Saved by grace through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast. Pauline. Justification by faith, Pauline. He said that's why Catholics have been very, very weak on the doctrine of salvation. We don't get it. We don't get Paul teaching salvation is by grace through faith, not of works, because we've been too busy into the Gospels. It's you guys, on the other hand. You're so into Paul, you never get into the Gospels. I said, how does this work out in real life? He said, you guys who are so interested in articulating Pauline propositional truth turn out television evangelists who are doing this every Sunday. And we turn out Mother Teresa. Whoa. Well, stop to think about that. When you think of somebody who's living the life that Jesus prescribed, what television evangelist is into that? Name one. In their private jets and their $1,000 suits. How many of us can point to a television evangelist and say, now there's somebody who's living like Jesus. Let me just break it to you. Not even Billy Graham will fit. And he's the best we got. You can not only point to Mother Teresa, but if you run around with Catholics long enough, you'll find that there are thousands of them all over the world who are living out the simple life of Christ, sacrificing for the poor and the needy of the world. You see, it's a big difference between the two. What we need, of course, is an embracing of both the epistles and the Gospels. To neglect one to the expense of the other, to do one at the expense of the other, is a mistake. And what this program will try to do, because most of the people who come into it are evangelical Protestants, is to turn you into red letter Christians. That is, people who take Jesus seriously. And not just Pauline theology. But we're going to ask you to take Pauline theology seriously as well.